Hi, my name is Cameron Knight. I'm here with you again today for another awesome Tuts Plus photography tutorial. Today we're going to be doing an editorial portrait, and what I mean by that is that my background is in photojournalism newspaper work, and oftentimes I found myself needing to shoot portraits. Although normally we try to catch stuff live as it's happening, oftentimes we need to do a portrait. And there's two reasons for that. The first is, oftentimes we aren't there for the achievement or the event that the person we're taking a picture of was involved with for the story. So we need to go afterward, take a portrait, set it up, and make it look nice. The second reason is we're trying to encapsulate a person's career or their personality in one image. And sometimes that's not possible to do in a live kind of setting. So you want to try to sum it up in a bigger way, make it a more grand picture. And that's what we're going to try to do today with our subject, Emily Brandehoff. She's the resident artist at Thunder Sky Inc., a gallery located in Cincinnati, Ohio, that features outsider artists, artists that would be excluded from the typical mainstream art community. As a resident artist there, she produces awesome murals and paintings of different zombie-themed works, and also produces other small things, fruit-based work, all kinds of really cool stuff. And today we're going to shoot a portrait of her in her apartment. I wasn't able to visit this area ahead of time, this scene ahead of time, so I'm working kind of blind, and that's how oftentimes editorial portraiture works. You don't know where you're going to be shooting. You're not sure how much time you're going to have. You have to be in and out quick. I'm using a minimalist setup today that I'll show you in a minute. But when I came in today, I saw this awesome antique surgical table that she has in her apartment, and then this great zombie-themed artwork that's behind it. So we're going to shoot the portrait here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring her in, and I'll show you my equipment. So this is my minimalist lighting setup that we're going to be using today. I do have an extra strobe on just a slave that I may throw in the background here somewhere. I'm just not sure how that will work out. But that's just going to be kind of on the fly as I go. What I have here is a Vivitar 285 flash, typical kind of manual flash setup on a stand in a shiny umbrella. The reason I'm not using a softbox, instead I'm using an umbrella instead of a softbox, is that I have a giant area to cover here, and a big giant umbrella is going to cover this much more evenly than the small softboxes that I have available. If you had a giant big octabox or something big, then you'd be able to do that fine, but I just don't have that equipment available to me, so we're going to be focusing on just a giant umbrella, a big 45-inch umbrella. So that's what we're using in terms of lighting equipment. I'm using my D700 to shoot today. I'll be using probably a wide-angle lens initially, or between a 50 and a 24. Those are the two lenses I'll be using primarily. I want to try to do some straight-on shots of this first, just to kind of encapsulate everything, give it a very painterly kind of look by keeping all the planes flat. And then I also want to try to do some angular shots, just to maybe include parts of this table a little bit more. But you'll get to see those shots as I go through. So let's get started. Okay, so we've got Emily here. So we're going to go ahead and start taking some shots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my 24mm lens, which is what I was talking about before. Oftentimes in environmental portraiture and editorial portraiture, you're trying to include backgrounds and stuff. So unlike wedding portraiture or any kind of glamour portraiture, you're not trying to knock the background out of focus, you're trying to include it, and that oftentimes means using a deeper depth of field and a wider focal length lens. I am using, I have my f-stop set at f9, and I have my shutter speed at 125, which is important because of the, where I'm using flash, and then my ISO is set at 400, just to give you an idea of the settings I'm using. You can see that the light has kind of changed positions. I have my main light over on this side over here in the umbrella, and then I also set up a small light on a slave over here bouncing off the wall. Oftentimes I find it easier just to find a place to set a flash to kick in some extra light, fill in some shadows, and that's exactly what that light's doing. It's just filling in some shadows that are forming on this side because I wanted that light to be kind of directional and angular. So the light over here is filling in this painting a little bit, and then also filling in shadows on the side of the subject's face. So we're going to go ahead and knock out some shots in this position, and then we'll change things up and get started on something else. So here's the first image that I got with my initial light setup. There's a couple issues with it. First, the shadows are bizarre. I couldn't get the shadows to balance just right. You can see on the side of her head, there's actually, on either side of her head, there's actually a shadow from each light, which is a little bit weird. There's also pretty distinct shadows around the paintings. Obviously, the big painting to the right side of the image has the worst kind of bizarre up shadow. So while I like this image and while I think I could tone it to make it look a little bit better. I am going to move on to some of the other poses that we are going to try and maybe try to get something a little bit nicer. What I do like about this image is that there's the doorway, which is really nice, and that kind of adds a little bit of drama to the image, I think, and a little bit of balance. The other thing that I like about the image is that despite the weird shadows, the exposure on the paintings is actually quite good. So there's not any bizarre overexposures on the paintings or underexposures. You can see them really well. So I am going to try to keep those aspects of this image and carry those on to the next image, but I probably won't end up toning this image in the end for my final print. I'll probably go with another pose or another lighting setup. So let's switch the lights up and see what I can do. Okay, so now we've kind of rearranged the lighting to get another type of shot. I have my light over here in a collapsed umbrella. This kind of just works as a little bit of a snoot. It sort of makes the pool of light a little smaller. I just didn't want it falling on this wall too much, so I just collapsed my umbrella. Old trick, one of the oldest tricks in the book with lighting with umbrellas. So I've got it over here. I'm going to be shooting from just about right here with a little bit tighter lens to try to get a little bit of dimension to the photo with lines from the wall and the art in the foreground as well as the background. So we're going to go ahead and get this shot done. I also have another flash sitting out of camera right now, pointed straight toward the wall out of very low power, bouncing off the ceiling. And that's just to fill in shadows again and kind of just balance the light out a little bit. So I'll go ahead and show you guys these images, and then we'll switch things up again and go for one more round. So I like this image a lot better. The lighting is a lot more even. The shadows around her head are very nice. I was a little bit worried being that close to the wall that the shadows would be really distracting, but this lighting setup really fills in those shadows quite nicely. You can see the artwork really well still, but I think this lighting setup will also work for a more straight-on shot, which is what I'm going to try next. I like this image, and I may end up using it in the end to create my final image, but I think it might be the next one that really gets me going. Again, when you're shooting paintings, you can really have trouble with reflections, and getting the exposure wrong on a painting means that you're almost misrepresenting someone's art. So it's really important to make sure there's no bizarre glare, there's no overexposure or underexposure on the paintings. The additional problem or the additional challenge with this image is her glasses, which I've managed not to get any reflections on. With glasses, it's always a little bit difficult, a little bit tricky. The other issue with glasses is sometimes they cast shadows on the face that become really weird. So you've got to be careful of that too. But I got relatively lucky in this sense that I didn't run into any of these problems throughout this shoot. So let's move to the third setup and see what I can manage. All right, so for this last shot, I just want to use this side lighting that I set up. I really liked how that worked out, this side lighting. So I just want to utilize that again, just kind of around front, how we were doing before. So what I've gone ahead and done is left this light where it is, and then I've moved my flash back to the original position, kind of bouncing against the wall instead of bouncing straight toward the subject, so to fill in side shadows. So I want to see how that looks. I really like the way that it's coming together with the light. And after that, what we're going to do is I will take you back. We'll leave Emily to herself here in her apartment and let her go back to her normal work. And what we're going to do is jump back into Photoshop, and I will show you guys how I'm going to post-process all these images, and we'll jump into Photoshop and you'll be able to see the final results once we're done toning, cropping, and all that stuff. So let's get these last couple shots done. So I really think this is going to be my final image. Despite the fact that there are still a little bit of strange shadows around the picture frame, the large picture on the right, and a little bit of weird shadowing around her head, it's much less problematic than the first image that we shot. The shadows, because this is supposed to be kind of a scary themed picture, I don't think the shadows are that bad. What I haven't mentioned in the other pictures is the pose. Posing on top of this surgical table was pretty difficult, but I think that we managed to do it pretty well. The way that I prompted her during the posing sessions was just to keep her back straight, have good posture, and I wanted the situation to juxtapose with her expression. I wanted her to have just like a nice, pleasant, warm expression on her face, juxtaposed with these strange images of zombies and the surgical table and all of that. So I think this last one is going to work really well. We've got the very cool paintings going on. We've got a little bit of the doorway that I liked from the initial images. While the light isn't just right in the center around her, becomes a little bit strange, and we're going to see what we can do to fix that. But the light throughout the rest of the picture is really interesting. There are bright spots and less bright spots and kind of stuff to make it seem a little bit more textured and give it a little bit more depth, which is what I really like about it. So we're going to go ahead and throw this one into Photoshop and see what we can do with it. So here we are in Photoshop with our new image. I'm going to do a bunch of different things to this, but the very first thing I want to start with is correcting the lens distortion. My 24mm lens introduces a little bit of just kind of bulging distortion to the image. So I want to go ahead and correct that first. I'm in CS3. There's ways to correct this in Lightroom and different ways to correct it in the later versions of Photoshop, but I'm just going to use the distort filter. You just go to Filter, Distort, Lens Correction, and then to fix bulging distortion, what you do is you go to the plus side of the Remove Distortion slider here. The minus side will make it actually look even more distorted. So what I'm going to do is just type in a number here, since I know I'm going to go +3 on the distortion, maybe +4, and then hit OK. So what that does is you can see that it pulls the center of the image in. You can notice that there is now missing data on the tops and sides of the image. So now what we have to do is crop to correct for that. So I'm going to simply crop. I'm going to try to keep all the lines straight. The way that I do that is I normally pick a line. I'm going to pick this side of the painting right here to go off of. So that looks just about right. And then I drag my points out to fill as much as I would like to fill. So I'm just going to go just above the doorway, and then I'm going to try to go down as far as I can to include as much of that table as possible. So that looks pretty good. So now our lines are straighter. They're not perfect, but they're straight enough. The next thing I want to do is set a white point for my image. This is going to do a couple of things. First, it's going to give me a starting point with my white balance. You can tell that the image is a little bit warm, and that's just how I had my white balance set in camera. So I'm going to play with it a little bit to try to maybe go cooler just to see what it looks like, and then also to just set my exposure point as a white point. So I'm going to open levels using Command L, and then I can click my white eyedropper, and then I'm going to come in here along this side of the frame. I have a nice gradient to set my white, so this is probably pretty close to a pure white. If you look over here, you can see the CMYK values, so that's one of the brightest points in the image, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And that looks a little bit too bright to me, so I will undo that. And what I want to do now is maybe jump over here to the other side just to try it again. That actually looks okay to me, so I'm going to go ahead and go with that. And then what I want to do is bring up the mid-tones a little bit. Her face is just a little bit too dark for my taste, so I'm going to bring up the mid-tones a bit, and then add a bit of contrast by bringing my black point down just a little bit. So that looks pretty good. Now, I think I'm going to leave the crop the way it is. I was debating cropping down to the top of this picture, but I just don't think that's going to work very well. So I'm going to leave the crop as is. So now I want to come in and take a look at the shadow in here, just to try to reduce it just a little bit. So the way that I'm going to do that, to use my lasso tool, I'm going to select this with a pretty big feather. I'm going to use a 20 pixel feather. Just select really big here. And then filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And then take my pixels way up. So that looks pretty good. So if I can go into my history here and check out what I've done, Just softens that shadow up a little bit. So I'll deselect here. And then what I'd like to do is come in to the face a little bit. I'm going to do another lasso tool here. I just want to brighten up her face just a touch. Use the white point to do that. Looks pretty good. I'm going to do another small blur here just to blur out that line too. Let's go ahead and try the same setting. That looks pretty good. And let's zoom out and take a look. I think what it needs now is a little bit tighter crop. A lot of times I crop my images a lot at different times. So I'm going to come down to the very top of my doorway. I'm going to come in a little bit here. I'm going to come in all the way to the side of this image. And I'm going to come up a little bit. So that looks a little bit better. And now what I want to do is add a vignette. You can also do that in the lens correction. You just use the vignette here. You can darken. Looks pretty good. Change my midpoint. When you change your midpoint, it kind of changes the feather. I would kind of call it the feather of the vignette. Let's go ahead and apply that. So that looks a little bit better. What I'd like to do is use my history brush to go back to before the vignette and brighten up the image just a little bit to just take some of that contrast that got sapped out, bring that back. Okay? And then what I'd like to do is the brightest part of the image is right through this streak here, and I'd like to bring that down just a little bit. So the center of attention is her and not necessarily over here. So I'm just going to again use really simple techniques, just a burn here, nice big brush. So I'm going to do it on the midtones and just hit right there. And it just brings it down just a little bit. It kind of follows through up into this corner, so I'm going to hit that with just a little bit of exposure. And then what I'm going to do is use my selection tool again with a really big feather, 100 pixel feather. Select my center here where she's at. And then brighten her up just a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and tone the other image as well, but I want to show you the before and after of this. So we can go back to right after the distortion. You can see, there we go. And then all the way down to where we're at now. I think it looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. We'll open our second image here that we're going to work on. Obviously, you can do a lot to images to tone them. What I'm trying to practice here is just quick tones, the same as I would do on a newspaper. You're putting on maybe not the best quality paper, so every pixel doesn't necessarily count. It's just the general impression of the image you're trying to get. And when you're working on a newspaper, you're always on a deadline, so you can't spend hours and hours editing your images. So for this, I'm not going to try to correct my lens distortion, mainly because I used a 50 to shoot this and it doesn't have as much. But what I am going to do is bring it in and try to correct for the tilt. There is a bit of tilt. So I'm going to line up my edge with the side here. So that looks pretty good. And then just bring all my points in to make sure I have enough. I want to try to keep her as up in the frame as possible. So I don't want to chop off too much of the bottom there. And everything looks pretty straight. I'm going to bring it down to the top of this head and then in all the way to there and in all the way to there. That gives me just a hair on the bottom I can bring back in. Go ahead and crop. Looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and do another crop and just remove this white line on the side here. Just crop all the way into the painting. Pretty nice. So again, I'm going to try to get a white point. It's a little too much. The white balance on this doesn't look too bad, so I'm going to use my points here to get a nice contrast. Looks pretty nice. This is a little bit of a flat image, so bringing that black point down a lot is going to make a big difference. So that looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try a little bit of a weird technique. I'm going to use a really big feather, 200 pixels. I'm going to go all the way across the top of the image here. And then I'm also going to come down on the side here. And then I'm going to drop the exposure of all of this using the midtones just to bring it in a little bit. Looks pretty good. And then I have an area down here too. I'm going to use a big feather and just kind of drop that down as well. There we go. So now the brightest portion of the image is her again, this kind of center portion. And I actually like this image pretty well too. I like this image almost as much as I like the other one. I think the reason I like the other one better is because the surgical table is in it. But this image is probably a nicer image composition-wise. It just looks really nice. The tones are better. There's no weird shadows to deal with. So I think this is probably the winner picture, but I'm probably a little bit more emotionally attracted to the other one because of the surgical table being in it. Just the content of the image, but technically this is probably a much nicer image. So I hope you enjoyed following along with me today for this great environmental portrait shoot that I had a chance to do. Again, this isn't a huge high-end, high-budget shoot. This is a run-and-gun portrait shoot. You know, you're in someone's house. You don't have your full studio available to you. It's just something you have to do on the fly. So I hope this gave you some insight into how this is done, how to make a nice picture in a short amount of time, and how to work around someone else's schedule too. This isn't a professional model. This is someone who does this on the side and wants to have a quick portrait done or something. So it was a lot of fun for me to do. I want to thank Emily again. It was a really good time. And join us again next time for another great photography tutorial. Hope to see you then.